My name is Patrice Franco, and I'm honored on behalf of the Global Studies Program and the Goldfarb Center for Public Affairs and Civic Engagement to welcome you all for this very special Colby evening. I'd like to extend appreciation to those coming from afar, including the minister's aides. Chupo, where are you? Yes, over there, right? And Constance, as well as our honored guest and favorite Colby friend, Dr. Aline Gelbard. Some of you coming from closer or perhaps visiting as prospective students and Colby families, welcome. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, you're a path-breaking policymaker, committed development economist, and change agent. Called by the British Independent, the woman who has the power to change Africa. You indeed have. You're pragmatic and passionate about promoting transformations at the intersection of economic and political policies. You've risen to the economic challenges of your time. As Vice President of the World Bank, you tackled debt reduction while always cognizant of the impacts on democratization. You left your 21-year World Bank career to return to Nigeria, assuming the posts of Foreign Minister and Minister of Finance twice, and Coordinating Economic Minister. To confront the corruption that erodes growth, you promoted transparency in government finance. Engaging Nigerians to own policy change, you reduced the value of Nigeria's external debt from 35 to 5 billion, releasing important resources for health and education. You've been recognized by the international media for your bold and controversial policies. You received the 2005 Euro Money Award for Vision and Courage, that you have a lot of, and have appeared multiple times on the Forbes Most Powerful Women in the World list. And Time Magazine lists you as one of the most influential people in the world. I can't resist adding, as I moved from one gorgeous online award picture to another, I think you should have also won a prize for the most beautifully dressed. In addition to your BA from Harvard, magna cum laude, and your PhD in economic development from MIT, you hold 5 honorary doctorates. One, we are very proud to say, from Colby College. Today you'll be sharing your views about Nigeria, Africa's most populous and largest economy, in a period of political transformation against the backdrop of weak oil. Your talk will build upon your recent book, Reforming the Unreformable, Lessons from Nigeria. We're eager to hear your thoughts, so would those in the room please join me in warmly welcoming Minister Okonjo-Iweala back to Colby.
Well, Patrice, thank you so much. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here with you this evening. I'm delighted to be back to Colby College. And I have very fond memories of my last visit in May 2007, when by the authority of the Board of Trustees of Colby College, I was awarded an honorary doctorate degree. So 8 years on, and it feels like yesterday. I'm sure many of you here may not feel that way. But with me, time goes by so fast that 8 years seems like a drop in the bucket. There are not many institutions like Colby College who have more than a 200-year history of academic excellence, integrity, and diversity. These are excellent values that help this institution to succeed. And though I know there may have been 1 or 2 hiccups in incidents a week or so ago, I believe that the way that it was handled by the president, the faculty, and the students augurs very well for this college. Colby College, as we know, has pioneered several important initiatives in higher education. From the time when its students organized the first collegiate anti-slavery society in the US, till when it became one of only 4 colleges or universities in the US and the first among its peers to achieve carbon neutrality. It is the same pioneering spirit that we, the people of Nigeria, continually demonstrate in areas such as trade, industry, entrepreneurship, technology, and entertainment. That pioneering spirit has made us one of the largest economies on the African continent, and sometimes also known as the loudest. I want to thank the chair of the Board of Trustees. I want to thank Ambassador Bob Gelbard and his wife Aline, who is here. I don't know where she is, right in front of me. They have been friends for such a long time. Their love of Colby is unparalleled, and they've brought me and my husband to also share that appreciation for this college. I know that President David Green is not here today, but I also want to thank him for being a host to us. He once said that every time you're able to alter the life course of a student in a positive way, you have the chance of altering the life course of many thousands over time. I couldn't agree with him more. Finally, I want to thank Professor Laurie Clester, Provost and Dean of Faculty, and above all, Professor Patrice Franco, the Grossman Professor of Economics. She's worked so hard to make this room full this evening. I think you've succeeded beyond your expectations, right? Thank you for being so accommodating to all our requests, being welcoming. But I also want to thank you for your work as a development economist. But there's one request I have to make of you and your students. You have to shift your attention a little more to Africa and away from Latin America. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I've just come from what can be termed a really memorable and historic event in Nigeria. A keenly contested presidential election took place on the 28th of March this year. And when the results came in a couple of days later, the incumbent president, Dr. Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, who lost out, reached out and congratulated the winner, General Muhammad Buhari, even before the conclusion of the vote count. This is something we've never witnessed in Nigeria. You may be used to it as a routine thing in the US, but that's not the case in my country and even on the continent. Because rather than give the world the violence they had all been expecting, we gave them a peaceful, democratic transition. And I must say that though I come from the government that lost, and I'll be phasing out of my job in the next few weeks, thankfully. But I'm extremely proud to be a Nigerian, to have been there to witness this moment of strengthening democratic transitions and culture in my country. And to me, it augurs well for all the young people, not only in my country, but on the continent. It is on the back of this peaceful transition that we can now look at the last 5 years under the leadership of the president and the next 5 years or 10 years or 12 years, whatever the case may be, under the administrations to come. I think that we need to congratulate the current president, President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, the incoming president, Major General Buhari retired, for both taking us through this historic moment. And I'd like you to give them a round of applause, even if they are not here. With this backdrop on the politics of the country, I've been asked to speak a bit more on the economic prospects. How does Nigeria move forward in a world of weak oil prices? As many of you know, the Nigerian economy has been reliant on income from oil, from the oil sector, for at least 4 decades. Nigeria has been through many cycles of oil price volatility, and the year 2014 ushered in another severe cycle, with oil prices falling by more than 50%, and the price of Bonny Light, which is the name for our own brand of crude, which enjoys a premium, crashing from a peak of about 116 US dollars per barrel around mid-2014 to around US $50 per barrel by January 2015, more than a 50% drop, even though it has recovered to around $63 a barrel today. This fall represents a considerable shock to our fiscal revenues. Unlike the 2008-2009 crisis, where we had strong buffers in the form of fiscal savings, our buffers this time were thin. So we had to take appropriate fiscal and monetary policy measures. We were proactive. We didn't wait. We took down the benchmark oil price for budgeting from $78 to $53 a barrel. We administered expenditure cuts and put in place measures to raise extra revenue. We unified the exchange rate and depreciated the currency by about 20%. All this was not easy, but it represented a difficult but orderly adjustment to the strong headwinds confronting the economy. I've just come from the spring meetings of the IMF and the World Bank that ended yesterday, where all the finance ministers from all over the world meet to discuss the global economy and the way forward. All the expert forecasts for most commodities, especially oil, point to a lower price environment for the years ahead. A poll of economists and finance ministers there indicates that no one expects the return of $100 per barrel oil price anytime soon. Expectations are more in the $60 to $70 range, indicating that this price shock that we've had this time, unlike the one in 2008-2009, should be treated more as a permanent phenomenon. This is because the origins of the present price shock have more to do with expansion in supply than they have to do with weaknesses in demand. Advances in technology, like fracking and other technologies, have led to expansion in supply in the US and in other countries, Canada and so on. And I think that this phenomenon of increases in supply presently outweigh the demand and will continue to do so into the future, according to the views of many of the economists. So how should a country like Nigeria react to these circumstances? How should Nigeria react to a world of weak oil price in a situation where 70% of government revenues depend on oil and 80% of exports? In fact, 90% of exports. You might be surprised to hear me say, as finance minister, that this may not be such a bad thing for Nigeria and for other oil exporting countries. People are a little bit surprised when we say that. But why do I believe that this may not be so bad and we should look at it differently? It's because I believe that the weakening oil price presents not so much a challenge, yes, it is one, but it also presents a huge opportunity to diversify Nigeria's economy and make it the kind of economy it truly should be, an economy beyond oil. So what I want to talk about today is that, the Nigerian economy beyond oil. Let me elaborate on that. It's not a well-known fact that Nigeria's economic growth of about 7% per annum in the past decade, one of the fastest growth rates in the world, in fact, one of the 10 fastest, was firmly based on the non-oil sectors. The oil sector has actually largely contracted in the past decade. When we rebased our economy in 2013, after 24 years of not doing so, we found that we not only had the largest economy in Africa, with a GDP of 510 billion, but also a well-diversified economy with services at 51%, industry at 26%, agriculture at 22%, telecommunications at 8%, having grown from about 0.7% of GDP over a decade, and a relatively new industry that didn't even feature as a part of GDP, which is the creative industries, popularly known as Nollywood, at 1.2%. Have you heard of Nollywood? I'm sure that not many of you spend time watching these movies. This diversified economy was an important surprise. We didn't know that we had such a diversified and expanding economic base. But what we did know is that in spite of this diversity, the source of our fiscal revenues remained undiversified and highly dependent on oil at 70%. But the findings on the structure of the economy after rebasing meant that we now had the base on which to make a significant shift in the source of revenues. If we could tax this diversified base more efficiently and effectively, and if we could continue to deepen this diversified economy, we would truly be able to change the shape of Nigeria's development path over the coming years. This is the vision, then, that we have for Nigeria's development in the next 2 decades. An economy reliant on agriculture, creative industries, manufacturing, communications technology, and SMEs to drive growth, create jobs, create wealth, and solve the difficult problems of growing inequality and lack of inclusion that we're experiencing now within our economy. It would also solve the problem of an economy too reliant on one source of revenue. It would make it an economy relying on multiple sources, an economy that can have sustainable growth and development over the medium to long term. That is the vision, that is the dream, and that's the reality of what the Nigerian economy should pursue and should look like 2 decades down the road. So how are we gearing up to do this? How will we realize this vision and this dream? In the present administration, we did 3 things to lay the foundation to continue to realize this dream. The first was to build infrastructure. The second, build institutions to strengthen governance. And the third, to provide support and incentives to the real sectors of the economy so they could continue to develop. Let me just say a few words on each of these. First, infrastructure. If we truly want the Nigerian economy to continue to diversify in the future, the deficiency in infrastructure, particularly electricity, must be met. That deficiency in electricity alone cost us 2 to 3 percentage points in GDP growth each year, according to estimates. To tackle this, we developed a 30-year infrastructure master plan. And our plan is that we should raise our stock of infrastructure from the current 35 to 40% of GDP to 70% by 2043. That is the vision. And to do this in an integrated way is the way to go. Let me just mention 1 or 2 areas of critical importance. Nigerians complain about the lack of power, the lack of electricity, for both industry and households. And this is true. For decades, we are not able to manage the power sector very well. The government did not succeed in providing what Nigerians needed, sufficient power to power their households and to power industry. So after decades of trying, 10 years ago, we finally decided that hitting our heads against the same wall and getting the same answer was not the way to go, but that we should do something unprecedented, which is to privatize the entire power sector. And that's what we did, a very bold move to package our power industry, our utility, into 10 distribution companies and 4 generation companies and sell them off to the private sector, and to liberalize the sector so that new investments could come in. All this was now realized under the leadership of this administration. And we hope that with the framework that has been put in place, we will be able to move the country in a year or two to a situation where power, just like telecommunications, is no longer a problem. We are not there yet because we have problems with gas supply. But one by one, with a steady pace of tackling these problems, I think 2 to 3 years down the line, that particular problem of infrastructure will be under control. A lot of work was also done on the road sector, on reviving rail, which had been moribund for more than 20 years. You cannot have a large economy like Nigeria operate without a rail infrastructure. How do you haul freight? So we had to revive that. Our aviation infrastructure was also lagging behind, and we began the reconstruction of 22 airports, including the building of 5 new international terminals. So these are just some of the things that we did to try and put in place the infrastructure that would be needed to spur sustainable growth in a diversified economy. The second set of issues to tackle is building institutions. The difference between developed and developing countries, between people who live here and people who live in Africa or Latin America and so on, is the absence of institutions. And without tackling that problem of the systems, the processes, the framework within which to build your economy, you'll not be able to have the basis for sustainable development. So the second set of issues to tackle was the building of missing institutions. Let me also say that building institution systems and processes lies at the heart of fighting corruption and plugging leakages. When we think about fighting corruption, we often think of catching the corrupt people and punishing them, isn't it? Not allowing impunity. But if you don't tackle the fundamentals of plugging those leakages, building the systems that prevent people from having access to those funds, you will not be able to tackle the situation in the long term. So putting in place those institutions were some of the things we also focused our attention on. Let me just give you a few examples. I talked about it in the class that I visited this afternoon. And I said, for example, our public financial management systems, most of the things were done in a manual way. You want to pay salaries to different departments, ministries, and agencies. The money is transferred manually from Treasury to this department to pay the staff. And what does all this manual transfer and manipulation of resources entail? Or what does it give a chance for? It gives a chance for cash to be missing, isn't it? It gives a chance for people to introduce people who are not really on the payroll into the payroll and collect the monies of those people. We call them ghost workers. So by putting in place a system, an electronic platform, and a biometric system, taking advantage of current technologies, we were able to start enrolling public servants and paying them directly through this biometric system called the Integrated Payroll and Personnel Management System, which we've been building over the past 6 years or so. By doing that and enrolling every worker directly, we've been able to weed out 63,000, I said 53 here, it's actually 63,000 ghost workers. And we've been able to save $1.1 billion. This is a far more effective thing in fighting corruption, isn't it? It is far more enduring. We've put the government financial system on an electronic platform. So payments are made electronically, people are paid electronically, and this removes interference. This is what a modern financial platform should look like. But did we have it? The answer is no. And it doesn't sound very sexy either. When you talk about government integrated financial management system, people's eyes glaze over, don't they? You talk of integrated personnel and payroll management system. Doesn't sound as good as that person was taken and put in prison. But it saves you more money, plugs more loopholes, plugs more leakages than all the actions you could have together. And it is because in your country, you have these systems in place. That's what prevents people from being able to be corrupt and to access money. It is not because the people here are different from the people there. The big problem is the absence of institutions which we are now building. Of course, values matter tremendously. I'm not trying to say that just having an electronic system with no values is the total answer. You need values too. But I tell you that institutions matter, and all economists know that. Now, let me just give you one more example of institutions that we're missing. I just mentioned one, the absence of a functioning mortgage system. Everybody wants a roof over their heads. People want to own their own homes, right? But if you do not have a system that provides that service, what happens? Either you wait until the end of your career, you rent and save up till you can buy a house, or you look for all ways and means to put money together to acquire that home. I strongly believe that the absence of some of these institutions in our economies also contribute to people looking for monies in ways they shouldn't. Can you imagine an America where there's no mortgage system? I mean a good one, because we have to remember that, what happened in 2008, 2009 doesn't provide the very best example, does it? The fall of Lehman Brothers, and I often joke that were they to have been Lehman sisters, it might not have happened. But that's a story for another day. But the functioning of those institutions, the greed that entered into the system, and the lack of strong regulation on our financial systems also led to their collapse. So that's not the type of mortgage system I'm looking at. We may look at some part of that model, but very strongly modified, without products that we don't understand, like derivatives. But the absence of a functioning mortgage system in a country creates a lot of stress and a lot of opportunities for people to do things they should not do to find money. We have built the Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Corporation to be able to provide young people hope that over the time of their career, they can have a mortgage, an affordable mortgage, and buy their own home. That's another institution we put in place. The last one I want to quote is the building of the Development Bank of Nigeria. Small and medium enterprises, which create the most jobs and provide the backbone of the service sector in our economy, have no access to term lending. If you want to borrow as a small entrepreneur, it's only for 1 or 2 years with no period of grace. How then do you grow your business when you can't get money for 5 years? You can't get operating capital for any sustained period. So building an institution that provides this, the Development Bank of Nigeria, will be a wholesale bank that will wholesale money to other institutions, including commercial banks, so that SMEs can have access to finance for 5 to 10 years with 1.5 years period of grace. This will help us create the backbone for these small and medium enterprises to create value in the economy and create jobs. So this is an example of the types of institutions we've been able to build in these past 4 years that we believe are critical in driving the economy going forward. So I've talked about the two conditions precedent, infrastructure and institutions. On the back of this, we are then able to look at the real sectors of the economy. And as I said, Nigeria is one of those countries that has the good luck, if you want to call it that, of having sources of growth in the economy. So the agriculture sector presents real opportunities for growth and development. And we've had a wonderful Minister of Agriculture who has driven agriculture as a business. and not as a development project, as he calls it. His drive to use electronic wallets to help farmers, especially women farmers, get access to seed and fertilizer by using the e-wallet, the phone, texting them vouchers, which they can then present to the dealer, and the dealer can go and collect the money from the nearest bank, made access to inputs possible for the majority of our farmers. 70% of them now get access to their inputs, compared to 11% before the introduction of the e-wallet, another institutional change. Before, only 11% of them were getting it because the money was the disappearing through the middle man or woman who was collecting it and not giving them the inputs they needed. Now, we've been able to produce so many million metric tons of food, 21 million metric tons over the past 3 years, more rice, more cassava. We've cut down on imports of rice, for example, and we're on our way within the next 3 years to becoming self-sufficient in rice, where we are right now the largest importer in the world. In manufacturing, we've launched the National Industrial Revolution Plan, looking at value chains of various subsectors: agro-processing, rice milling, sugar processing, petrochemicals, automobiles, textiles, cement. We used to produce 2 million metric tons of cement in 2002, and we used to have to import. Can you imagine that? But now, we export all over we now produce 28.5 million metric tons. Our needs are for about 19 to 20 million metric tons. And we're able to export the rest to other countries in Africa. Information technology. This is the wave of the future. We've focused attention in trying to develop this by laying 500 kilometers of fiber optic cables, getting our young people on the internet. I think 33% of our youth are on the internet for good and for bad. E-commerce is a reality in Nigeria now, and we have Konga, Jumia, and others that some of you will develop when you're ready, some of the Nigerians or non-Nigerians here. So we've focused also information and communications technology. We've not neglected oil and gas. I said the future is beyond oil, but we are looking at turning this sector more into a petrochemicals sector, plastics, fertilizer, and other products, and really adding value to our oil and gas assets. So these are some of the areas that we've been focusing on. We've also supported the creative industries. After all, California is the 8th largest economy in the world. Did you know that? California is based on services, the movie industry, and California's GDP is the 8th largest in the world. When you study that, you know that Nollywood deserves support. Nigeria has one of the third largest movie industry in the world. After Hollywood, there's Bollywood, and then there's Nollywood. And we have spent resources and energy supporting. We didn't create it, the private sector did. But what we've done is try to enhance their capacity to produce quality movies, look at their distribution systems, and actually Shukbo, who is in the audience, is a hero because this is one of the areas that he has been managing to help us boost support to this sector. So I've given you a rounded picture of the basis on which Nigeria can thrive within the prospect of weak oil prices. So what's the way forward? What should the new government do to realize and deepen the vision that I just talked about? First, they must maintain the macroeconomic stability that we've managed to put in place, and must do the adjustments that we started in order to correct for the fact that with weak oil prices, we did not have enough buffers to stabilize the economy, and we've had to make the necessary budget cuts, the necessary expenditure cuts, the necessary revenue-raising measures. That has to be continued. So we must embark and we must continue the fiscal reforms that we have started. We must restructure the budget and the budgetary process. And above all, even within the weak oil prices, there's still room to save. We must try to rebuild the buffers that were weakened over the last few years, bit by bit. That will require political consensus of the states and the federal government, all the actors in the economy, to be able to save more and rebuild those buffers. We must continue to diversify our sources of revenue. We've laid the basis. Last year, we hired McKinsey to work with our Federal Inland Revenue Service to strengthen our tax administration and improve our tax policy. We gave a target of $500 million over and above what we would normally collect, and we got $600 million. Firmly convinced that in the medium term, we can add another $3 billion to our tax revenues through strengthening tax administration, and a further $3 billion through tax policy changes, like doubling our VAT from 5%, which is one of the lowest in the world, to about 10%. These are some of the changes we will need to make to continue to diversify our revenue sources and push our country beyond oil. Let me just also mention that the efforts started in building and strengthening institutions to fight corruption and entrench transparency have to be continued. The efforts laid on infrastructure to help the real sectors of the economy also have to be continued. So the new administration has the task, and I believe will continue the task, of building on the foundations which have been laid, deepening and improving where there's plenty of room for improvement, and above all, charting a course that will get the economy to grow in ways that are more equal than what we have seen, ways that will create employment for our young people where there's growing unemployment, and ways that will tackle the lack of inclusion of people at the bottom end of the scale. These are the big challenges that we were facing during this period. These are the challenges that remain for the future. But these are the places where continuing the work that we started will also provide the opportunities to tackle these challenges. So where there's challenge, there's a solution, there's an opportunity, and what you require is focus and steadfast implementation. So in conclusion, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, as the new government comes into power, you will agree with me that the foundation has been laid, that the challenges are clear, that the opportunities are also there, that a social contract will need to be made, that values will have to be strengthened, but that above all, the prospects for a new, strengthened, diversified, and developing Nigeria, the prospects are strong. And with these words, I want to tell you that I believe that the potential for Nigeria to continue to drive growth, not only in the West Africa region, but in Africa, the prospects are very strong. And the future, I think, is bright. Let me end there, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. I think you all have a good taste of why this is one of the most influential thinkers in the world. And she's willing to take some of your questions. So we will have some mics here on either side. And I'd ask you to keep your questions brief so that we can hear mostly from the minister here. So, Catherine, please. Wait, please take the mic.
Thanks. Rather than yelling. Thank you for that. That was really fascinating and so inspirational. In this country, one of our biggest expenditures is healthcare, and we've just been through a long debate about the appropriate role of the government in healthcare. I'm wondering if you could comment about that in Nigeria.
Okay. Should I take maybe 3 or 4 and then?
Sure.
Or do you want me? Yeah, that might be more efficient.
There's one right here, if we can get, and one over here. Let's go those two, and then if you could get the,
Thank you, Minister, for your talk. I'm actually from Nigeria, Anambra State.
From where?
Anambra State.
Oh, okay.
So there
They're
was
very big traders and SME
Yes.
promoters of entrepreneurship in his state.
So thank you for that. There was something I thought was kind of missing in your speech that I was a little bit surprised. So the Nigerian music industry is booming. To me, it's one of the most amazing things that's happened over the 5 years. And I'm wondering, in terms of growing Nollywood, wouldn't a merger or sort of some sort of relationship between the two really help out very much? And then my other question is about fuel subsidy. Something else that you didn't mention when you were speaking of oil. So I'm still really confused about the whole fuel subsidy thing. It's something that left a lot of Nigerians a lot confused and paralyzed. If you could, give your excuse me, opinion on that and the role of it in growing our economy.
Let's get this right up here, take this question, and then we'll have some answers, and then we'll go for another round.
Thank you, Ms. Minister. I guess the only question I really have is how are you going to make the social contract against corruption work? Through education programs? I mean, other than that, your plan seems pretty solid.
Thank you.
Let's go with those, Ngozi.
Yeah.
Please.
Okay, very good questions. Thank you very much. On the issue of healthcare and the appropriate role of government, I think that most government, like in many developing countries, healthcare is a big issue just like it is here. And government has not been as agile in providing the needed services. In fact, 86% of healthcare services in my country at any rate, and in many of African countries, is private. People get most of their care from private sources. So that means that government really needs to strengthen and step up its role. And you have seen that it is the absence of strong healthcare systems that leads to the inability sometimes to deal with the diseases that come up. So I think that that government has a strong role to play in healthcare in our countries, to build a platform that can at least provide basic preventive healthcare and even some tertiary services. But government cannot be the only answer alone. We also need to encourage and strengthen private healthcare services. And government needs to build a system that can make access more affordable and of better quality for those, particularly those at the bottom end of the ladder. So I believe we have a role. Actually, in Nigeria, we are fond of criticizing everything government, and healthcare is no exception. We have a long way to go to have the kind of healthcare system we need. But I want to tell you that when it came to the emergency, the Ebola emergency, our healthcare system performed. And we are very, very proud of that. We were able to deal with Ebola decisively because of leadership from the top, because we had built a system for monitoring and dealing with polio, and we were able to draw the lessons and the resources from that system for intensive monitoring of the Ebola cases and follow-up and so on, for the lab work that needed to be done. So I have hope. What I'm saying is, whilst criticizing it, I think we really are beginning to have the basis for a good healthcare system, but the government needs to do more, not only at the federal level, but also in the state level to lay the basic infrastructure for that. The next question, very different on the music industry. When I was talking of the creative industries, yes, I know I said Nollywood, but we have a booming music industry too, which is exported all over the continent and beyond. And I know they've complained very much that we've not paid or supported them as much as those in the movie industry. But very much when we're talking about the creative industries, they're also included. And I think that what we are going to do next was to try and see what is it, how can we integrate them into what we're doing or help them more. I think some of the problems they suffer are the same. You know, the intellectual property issue, all the creative industries suffer this. And how to deal with intellectual property issues is one of the things that we're grappling with, because this is where they can really get help to make money, more money out of their own creativity. So I agree with you on that. On the issue of fuel subsidy, I carefully avoided talking about it. So it's not by chance. This is being live streamed and everybody is listening. So I do not want to, you understand that the last time we tried to do something about it, we had about $13.7 billion in fuel subsidies. Far too much a piece of our fiscal pie. And what if we could phase out of those, we would be able to channel resources more directly to poorer people in a way that would benefit them more. For instance, we have been working to build a social safety net system with conditional cash transfers centered around a woman and her 5 children, particularly for the north of the country where the issue of inclusion is very stark. And if we could channel some of that money in subsidies towards that, so that a woman who agrees to send her children to school gets a cash transfer. If you bring your children for immunization, you get a cash transfer. So you kill so many birds with one stone. That's a far more effective use of subsidies. So there's no ideological problem with subsidies. The issue is who gets them, how do you target them so that the poorest benefit? You know, so that's what we were trying to do at the beginning of 2012, but there was a lot of opposition to it. Nevertheless, the president stuck to his gun and phased out 50% of that, but we still have about 5 to 6 billion in subsidies. And that is a fiscal area that one can look at, especially in the low oil price environment, to see whether there is any room to deal with that particular issue. Let me leave it there and not say much more, because I don't want headlines tomorrow. The issue of the social contract. Well, I wasn't really talking about a social contract against corruption. I was talking more broadly. You know, when you want to develop a country, of course, corruption is one of the things, but I've talked extensively about how I feel we should tackle it, not only with punitive measures, which I totally agree with a speeded up judicial system, but also with the institution building that I spent so much time talking about. That, I think, for corruption and enhanced transparency, you really need to work on. But I was talking, a social compact is really getting an agreement on where the country should be going in the future, and what are the 4 or 5 critical actions needed to get it there. So much broader than the issue of corruption is getting society to agree on certain things so that whether this government is in or the next one comes in, certain things do not change. And from time to time, countries do manage to have this understanding that certain things are non-negotiable for the development of the country, and then they move forward. Whichever government comes in moves forward to implement these things steadily. That, to me, is the kind of social contract I was talking about. And in Nigeria, it would involve, several things. It would involve, agreeing that macroeconomic stability is key, agreeing that you need to save more, issues like that, I think, more broadly, is what I was talking about. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Gilbert. I'm from Uganda. I'm a senior. I'm going to be graduating soon. My question centers.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. My question is more about students who are studying abroad in countries like the United States. I was wondering if there are any policies in place to try to retain your top talent. I realize that in Uganda that's not really present, and we are as encouraged to go and live abroad and earn abroad as we are encouraged to go back home. So I was wondering if you're making any special effort to try to bring back the best students that you have who are probably studying abroad right now in regard to wages and such.
In regard to wages,
Thank you, Honorable Minister. I'm also a Nigerian, been in the United States for about 8, 9 years. And my concern actually has to do with power, the power sector that you talked about. Um, Nigeria was rebased as the largest economy in Africa and a country that has over 160 to 170 million people. And you would agree with me that power is a very major issue that needs to be tackled. And you talked about the privatization of the power sector. So between the privatization of the power sector and the previous sector we had, which was managed by the government, how much progress has been made? I lived in the United Kingdom and traveled to other European countries. We realized that sensitive areas of the economy, like power sector, are normally handled by the government of giving to one major sector and which a lot of oversight and regulation. Just like in the United States, for example, you have national grid that covers a lot of power supply. My question is that rebasing and putting Nigeria on the face of the world map, how much do you think we can do to make sure power is stabilized appropriately? Because I think that's one of the things that attracts investors, and I don't think that should be something that should be very difficult for your government or the next government to do.
Okay, one more, and I promise the next round we're going to go to the back. So here? Okay. The next round we're coming to the back, folks, all right? Hold on.
Hello, my name is Nicole. I'm a senior from Bates College. And so, well, the first thing with Nollywood, they recently signed a deal with Netflix, just in case anyone is interested in watching those movies. I was gonna talk about a little bit about the oil sector, and it's kind of in the informal economy of oil. And so I know in the Big Men documentary, you see a lot of people like rebels, Niger Delta rebels, who claim that they're getting paid to maybe ruin some pipes to create more jobs and all these things. And then in terms for like generators, that's equally a business in terms of like constant electricity. So I guess some of the concerns I have with privatization of the oil of electricity is that you have a lot of Nigerians who maybe go to Asian countries and who have like who bring back generators and who bring back oil and kind of want to continue the dependency on these types of forms of electricity. So that I know there have been a lot of different programs that were started in Nigeria to help combat this issue, but I know it usually reverts going back to generator and buying oil. And the last thing with institutions, although I agree a lot more need to be built. I wonder what your views are in the maintenance of these buildings. So we have like hospitals and schools in Nigeria that haven't been maintained since independence. So you have a lot of elites that will go abroad to get treated rather than get treated in Nigeria. And you also have a large issue with brain drain, just like as brother from Uganda said, going out of Nigeria and not really wanting to return. So that's all I have.
Can you take those three, and then we'll move to the back of the room, okay?
okay, the last speaker raised so many issues that I think we need another talk. But let me try to answer. Okay, I can take your brain drain and policies to retain top talent. The surprising thing that you need to know about Nigeria is that most Nigerians come back. This has actually been looked at. Nigerians tend to go back to their country much more than other nationals. Those that don't go back tend to retain their ties. Even if they don't go back, they continue to travel home and maintain their relationships and send money home. Nigeria has one of the largest source of remittances, according to World Bank data, maybe the third or fourth largest, at $21 billion a year, sent back by the millions of Nigerians outside, and they keep This is a strong source of income. People also wonder, how does the economy keep growing, even when things are difficult? It's because the remittances spur demand. And one of the dynamics of growth in the country is internal demand. So I'm just saying this to say that, unlike what you think, Nigerians come home. And if you go home now, the large numbers of young people who are coming back from Wall Street, from different places, and starting up their own businesses, they are quite substantial. So I don't know about, wages to retain top talent. There's no policy. I understand what you're talking about. And I also believe that if you want to attract certain skills back, you may need to have that extra premium. But think about it this way. There are also young people at home equally talented. And they don't take very kindly to the idea that you went and studied abroad and came back and you attract some premium that they themselves. I mean, I'm an example of that. And so, you don't, it's difficult to have one policy for one set of people, another policy. But what we should do is look overall at the relationship between skills, especially scarce skills, and remuneration. Because if you don't have that policy right, you will not be able to attract them. More broadly, whether you got the skills abroad, at home, or wherever. So there's a good point to be made there. But many of the top talent come back and set up their own businesses. And I strongly encourage that. But if you're waiting for the day when wages will attract you, you may have to wait a long time. Now, so I think on the brain drain, I've alluded a little bit to that. What has actually happened is an attempt at home to strengthen our tertiary institutions so that people don't travel out. And a lot of private universities have been licensed to enable people to stay at home. And actually, with 8 other people in the diaspora, we started 4 centers of excellence in Africa. One of them is in Nigeria, the African University of Science and Technology, so that our students, who are the best and who want to stay on the continent can have a place to go to. And I think that's another way to go, because the issue you're raising is critical. If we don't do something about it, then we'll continue to lose skills. So it's a very serious one, even though I sort of made a joke about it. On the power sector, there was a question about how much progress in the power. I tried to talk a little bit about it. There's so much to be said in the talk, and I thought I was taking too much time. What I said was that we have been trying to manage this power sector and improve it for decades, and the government has not done that. If you continued administering the same solution that doesn't work to a problem you have, you get nowhere. So the mere fact that, we admitted that, look, the government has not been very good in managing this, we need to find another solution, to me is revolutionary. Governments usually continue doing the same incompetent thing that they've been doing for quite some time. But for a decade, we admitted that and went ahead to unbundle the sector into 10 distribution companies, 4 generation companies, one transmission company. And you're right, the government has kept transmission, because it's not easy. It's not something you can unbundle. And what we did was we subcontracted the management to the private sector and sold off the other assets to the private sector. Now, privatization is not a panacea. It doesn't mean that the minute you sell it, all things are solved. You still have technical problems. You've got to establish an electricity market, which never existed. You have to have a strong regulator. And in both those things, we've made a lot of progress. The Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission is a very good regulator. We've established prices. We've established intermediary institutions to make the market work. But I think one of the things that we're struggling with is actually getting gas, a physical issue, to the power stations to light them. And that is because putting in gas infrastructure is also very costly. So we're also calling on the private sector to co-invest with us in public-private partnerships. And I believe if we go down that route and we complete some of the infrastructural investments in the oil and gas sector, within 2 to 3 years, we should begin to see a difference. But we also are looking at other sources of power, solar, just to hydro, especially in this year of climate change, negotiations. We also have to think climate smart. So the government has also been investing in some of these other cleaner energy solutions. So a combination of all of this, I think, is going to yield, just give it another couple of years. And I think, remember when the telecoms revolution started? And, things were expensive, they didn't quite work. You had these clunky phones, you paid too much for a phone call. And within 2 years or so, everything changed. Now, nobody remembers those difficult days. It seems as if we just arrived and everything was solved instantly. I believe we'll get there with power. On the issue of generators and so on, it's also linked. Of course, you have vested interests. That's what you're trying to say. That there's a whole industry of people who thrive on this, import of generators that try to prevent a success, of the power sector. It's true, because if the power sector succeeds, they're out of business. So you actually have people vandalizing gas pipelines. When you vandalize oil pipelines, at least you get oil to go and sell. When you vandalize a gas pipeline, you don't get anything except the potential of a big blow-up. So the fact that people have been cutting our gas pipelines should make you reflect that this is pure sabotage. And who is leading that sabotage? I'm not trying to accuse anybody. But, there have been a lot of questions about whether people who are making money now off of the dysfunction of the power sector are also those who are trying to prevent the gas pipelines from functioning properly. You mentioned quickly maintenance of institutions. Yes, we have a very poor. Well, when I was talking of institutions, I was really talking of institution building of systems and processes. But you raised another issue of actually maintaining our infrastructure. And we are very poor at it. We do not have a very good maintenance culture. And it's something we need to build. We build infrastructure, but over time we allow it to deteriorate. It's something we are really changing. And for roads and so on, there's a new bill, a set of bills in our transport sector that actually has gone to the National Assembly to institutionalize funds for maintaining our infrastructure so that over time they don't fall into total disrepair. So it's a very important issue that you raised there. And I think finally on healthcare, you talked about people going out. Yes, for healthcare. That is why the president encouraged very strongly that we not only try to strengthen our state institutions for healthcare, but also encourage the private sector that is already providing quite a lot to be even better and to build tertiary institutions, because what do people go out for? They go out for cancer treatment, for kidney failure, very sort of third level tertiary problems that we don't have the personnel and the equipment and so on to solve. So building some specialist healthcare institutions to take care of this is very important. And in fact, we now have a private sector alliance for healthcare led by Dangote, Jim Ovia, and some others, determined to work in public-private partnerships by Tony Elumelu and others. These are the big investors in the economy. They are determined to work with government to provide some of these healthcare solutions in country.
Thank you. We have time for one quick last lightning round. The minister is very tired. I promised the back of the room a little bit here, so we'll go this direction first.
Madam Minister, I'm Eric Kim from Kobe. So my question is, I know that there's a talk to adopt a new currency in West Africa and in Africa as a whole. With the recent issues regarding Greece and the Eurozone, how do you see the adoption of the ECO by 2023 in the future development of Nigeria and West Africa as a whole?
Thank you. Leah?
Thank you so much for coming. At the end of your talk, you began to mention the topic of inequality. So I'm wondering what policy reforms you think the Buhari administration should implement to address issues of poverty and socioeconomic inequalities.
Okay, and we'll take the last one with the patient woman right up there.
Hello. My name is Omolara Akingba. I am Nigerian, and I live in South Africa. And I was just wondering, in the news there was the xenophobic attacks that happened in South Africa, and Malawi had repatriated its people. And I was wondering, what is Nigeria doing about Boko Haram? Have they figured something out? Are they implementing things? Like what is happening with them? Because in the news they apparently threatened to start killing South African people who lived in Nigeria. And I was just wondering, what was the government's response to that? What are they doing actually to stop these terrorists from?
So you have two sets of questions. One has to do with the Boko Haram,
Yes.
and one has to do with South Africa.
Yes.
Am I getting it correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I think South Africans would be horrified if Boko Haram is after them. That's why I was asking. I think the adoption of the ECO by 2020, well, we are learning a lot of lessons from what is happening with the Eurozone, and we had a very good conversation. I think it was at dinner, or somebody asked a very good question along the same lines. In principle, it all sounds very good to have the one currency, to facilitate trade between countries, because intra-Africa trade is too limited. And if we don't get that right, I think we will lose a lot of potential for further GDP growth on the continent. But that being said, I think we also have to learn the lessons from the Eurozone. And the key question is, in terms of your structural reforms, your macro-fiscal reforms, are you ready? And have you built the base for all countries to enter in as participants within this system? And, we know that if we go to a unified currency, Nigeria is going to bear the brunt of whatever discontinuities there may be, because it's the largest economy and so on, just like as I was saying earlier, Germany does in Europe to some extent. And we haven't finished strengthening our own economy. We still have a long way to go, so many challenges, and the other countries too. So I'm not saying we won't have it or we won't get there. I think we should continue working at it. But we have to make sure that we have taken the right measures and the right reforms, not only fiscal, monetary, but also structural, to make our economies really ready to enter, a unified currency area. You've seen what is happening with Greece, and the fact that perhaps the right reforms hadn't been done there over time to really make them a strong member of the euro. So when the 2008-2009 global economic crisis hit, Greece got hit very hard because it didn't have the base, and that's what's causing a lot of problems now. So yes, let us keep working. We are all in favor of getting there. So we know the destination, but I'm not quite sure what the trajectory or how long it will take to get us there. Maybe 2023, maybe more. We'll see. The issue of inequality, poverty, and how to address. These are I said there were 2 or 3 fundamental things that are really challenging for our country. We have been growing, but we've been growing in an uneven and unequal way. So jobs, inequality, lack of inclusion, I think are 3 things that really have bedeviled us. And we set about trying to tackle this. The way to tackle it indeed is through that diversification of the economy that I talked about. If you diversify and support the sources of growth like agriculture, you create more jobs. Before, we were talking about the fact that we were creating jobs without even knowing how many, really measuring it properly, or how many we needed to create. Now, after some work that we did, done by the economic team during this administration, we know we have to create 1.8 million jobs a year. And with that, I think we started creating on average 1.4 million. So we are well on our way to closing that gap. But you also have the pool of unemployed that had accumulated over time. So those are the things that have to be tackled, and you do it by supporting sectors like agriculture, like housing. Housing creates a lot of jobs and has a lot of multiplier effects. That's why it is very closely monitored in this economy. Are you not surprised that every month, every week, there's something about the housing sector and jobs? It's because it's such a strong multiplier. So if we focus on that, we focus on agriculture, we focus on manufacturing, we focus on the services sector, I think this will help us tackle inequality. Africans don't really like, or let me say Nigerians are not very fond of handouts. They feel very uncomfortable with programs that transfer resources. They are more comfortable with jobs. If you ask a person, what do you really want? They want a job. So the more jobs we can create, the more people we can put to good work, quote unquote, the more entrepreneurs we can encourage who will create jobs for themselves and for others, the more interested people will be in that methodology for tackling poverty and inequality. Now, let me wrap that up by going back to what I said earlier. We know that even if you do all of that, there will be a segment of people who, for various reasons, will fall below or may fall through the cracks. And it's for those vulnerable people that you need to build a social safety net system. So we had started crafting one, and I hope that the new administration will continue on that path to put in place a conditional cash transfer system that can protect vulnerable women, people with disabilities, children, make sure that nutrition, healthcare, schooling is improved for the numbers of children who are not in school in the country. Then coming to the last set of questions, the xenophobic attacks, yes, that has come up, and I think it's unfortunate that, and I don't think the answer is for people, Nigerians or any others in their countries, to start attacking South Africans or South African businesses. South Africa is one of the largest, if not the largest investor in Nigeria. You know, one interesting phenomenon we now have in Africa is Africa investing in Africa. I don't know how many of you are following that. You know, that is a very interesting thing. Nigeria is investing in other countries, and other countries are also investing in Nigeria, and people are saying they will attack the businesses. I don't think so. So while it's unfortunate what is happening, I think, you know, the President Zuma has come out to say very forcefully, you know, that this is an unfortunate incident, to condemn it. And I believe they'll find ways to address some of the grievances of the disaffected people. What happens in every country is, you know, when there are problems, you tend to look for other people to blame, isn't it? You know, I remember, you know, in the 80s or so, when there were problems in Ghana and the economy wasn't very strong, you know, they blamed Nigerians, and Nigerians, you know, were asked to leave years and years ago and go back. Then we made a return match. When we started having problems, you know, we said Ghanaians should leave, and that was when the Ghana must go phenomenon came into being, you know. So we ourselves, you know, people tend to do that, and, you know, it's not the right thing. Luckily, there's less and less of that. So I think that dialogue, trying to listen to the people, to attend to their problems, to explain to them that those people are actually contributing to the economy, not taking away from it. I think some of these explanations and community, how do you call it? Trying to get down to the grassroots and working with these communities, I think that's the way to go. Let me see. The Boko Haram. Yeah, you know, of course, that has been a very difficult phenomenon for the country to cope with. We never dreamt that we would have such a phenomenon, and maybe that accounted for the delays in trying to tackle the problem, because people said, oh, there will be try to negotiate, and so some time was spent trying to see if there could be such a solution, and that didn't work because they are not interested in negotiations. So I think The only way to solve the problem, given the ideological bent and the extremism of these groups, is what is happening now. You've noticed in the last 8 weeks that the government and our armed forces, we are very grateful to them for laying their lives on the line, have made considerable advances in trying to tackle this problem. We've also made headway in getting the neighboring countries to cooperate more with us, because that wasn't always the case. So you know, a lot of the Boko Haram are from one ethnic group in Nigeria. And that group is found in Niger, it's found in Cameroon, it's found in Chad. So when they attack and you chase them, they just disappear into these other villages in these other countries. And they speak the same language, they're the same people. You know, the colonialists came and put these borders and just cut groups. I hope you feel appropriately guilty. If there are any British, German, French people in the room, you know, I want to make you feel very guilty. But, you know, these artificial borders just came and cut into various groups. And if you chase them, they disappear. And then what are you going to do? Go and bomb a whole village? So getting the cooperation of these countries to close the borders, to help us make sure they don't disappear, was crucial. And it is because that cooperation is now working, along with more, you know, the attacks of the Nigerian army, that we're getting some successes. And I expect General Buhari has said he will make this a cardinal point to continue and to have ultimate success against Boko Haram, and I believe this will happen. I mean, the groundwork has been done. We are making successes. We've reclaimed many areas now. People are moving back, and I think this will continue, and the peace that we've been longing for and we are now beginning to experience will endure. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. By the way, buy my book.
Minister, you've given us, yes, you've given us a wonderful gift of wisdom. Wisdom with a good dose of humor and warmth thrown in. I challenge the students in the room to take that wisdom as an investment and go and do good work. And so as you go, please go in this spirit of that the minister has lived, and that of changing the world and doing good things. So thank you all for coming. Thank you again so much for your wonderful time and your thoughts. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.